Hi DF exclamation point. Following up from last week, I was wondering whether we may see a future in which Xbox Game Pass, or Games Pass for Alex, could be a thing on PlayStation and Nintendo platforms in a world where Apple will get forced by the EU to allow other stores on their platform. It may set a precedent for future cases. This would potentially allow platform holders to sell games on rivaling platforms through their respective storefronts. Thoughts? I'm just going to quickly pop in on this one to begin with, but the direction of travel does seem to be that although Apple is resisting with all of its might to not allow competing storefronts onto its proprietary ecosystem, it does seem that it is going to happen sooner or later. And I do wonder whether the same thing will happen on console. And I do think at that point, Microsoft may well think, why not put Games Pass on PlayStation? It just kind of makes sense at that point. What I find quite interesting though is Tim Sweeney seems to be making a a point that these platforms are only viable because they're sustained by the licensing fees, and that those fees are effectively passed on to the user in the form of cheaper hardware. But I'm struggling to see whether the EU may see that distinction. What do you think the
Hmm.
future is there, John? Do you think that eventually all of these platforms will have to open up?
I think that Sony and Nintendo will fight tooth and nail to keep something like that off of their platforms. And I think that Microsoft, it would behoove them to get Game Pass on those platforms because Game
Hmm.
Pass is the most successful of the subscription services, I suppose, right?
Yeah.
And opening that
Hmm.
up to a larger base, that's a lot of that's a lot of potential money to make there.
Yeah.
And I would say this would not happen unless the legal stuff comes into play. If they are forced to, as we're seeing with these EU laws, and they decide they want to do it, there's a very real possibility they could make that happen, and Sony and Nintendo could not stop them. So I feel like that's the only way it would happen. I don't think that they would allow it to appear on their platforms freely without some sort of legal threat, because it
It
doesn't
is.
it
It
doesn't
is
benefit them
interesting that
really, right?
the champion of the free markets, Tim Sweeney, you know, he doesn't seem to have an issue with the console model. But that, with that said, I'm pretty sure that they've got some carve outs on their contracts, which mean they probably don't pay the 30% for Fortnite MTX that other people probably
Yeah.
do need to pay. Do you have any thoughts on this one, Alex?
I'd like to see it happen eventually.
Sure, yeah.
It is a little funny that you can get like some sort of EA subscription or whatever on a console, or buy a battle pass from a large software. Like, you can buy an ABK battle pass, or right, like or something for like Warzone. Get the
Mm.
next Warzone, but you can't do it with Game Pass, which is just another subscription, and they could take their cut of the subscription. I mean,
There would be, I mean, if this were to happen, there would be a massive impact on console prices because they could no longer be subsidized to the same level, right? Or there'd have to be some sort of accord, at least, that would make the models financially viable. Because when a console launches and it's put out there at a mainstream price point, they're losing a lot of money, and they amortize that cost because you've got to subscribe to PlayStation Plus to get your cloud saves and your online play and your free games, of course. But that's all factored into the calculation of how much they're going to charge for the console, and that would be problematic to that model. If you can't put
hmm.
out your console at 399, 499, whatever, because you're not going to get the same return that you would because you're competing on the market there. Yeah, that's going to be interesting because how would you get an installed base to begin with if you're having to charge 100, $200 more?
I don't know. It works for PCs.
Yeah, that is. Some might say that is a different market though, right?
Yeah.
And it is
I,
typically more expensive to get the same level of experience.
yeah, for sure. But I mean, I just think like it's also larger. So I don't know. I feel like it's possible. It would just be different. Just I don't know. Maybe we do the Microsoft thing where one is once again very underpowered and one is a lot more powerful. You have a larger gap then in the market. You have a larger premium machine that is much more worth its price. That's higher up, and then a low end switchy kind of thing. that is actually rather underpowered. I don't know.
Yeah, I actually think that's probably going to be the replacement for the S/X model on the next
Mm-hmm.
generation. Rather than have the S model, you have the handheld. And
That'd be
but
awesome.
yeah, there was talk, wasn't there, John, of a licensing. It was a rumor of a licensing scenario where a chipset could be sold by Microsoft to people who wanted to make their own Xboxes.
There was some kind of rumor about that. Like
Yeah,
a,
which would be an interesting scenario if it were
mm,
based on the handheld chipset.
it would be indeed.
Mm, interesting stuff. I mean, there are big questions here about the future of uh, exclusivity on a particular platform. I'm really interested to see how it plays out. But one way or another, it does seem that the momentum is going towards multi-platform, simply to expand the total addressable market and therefore
Yep.
justify these massive development costs that we seem to be seeing.